The words, "God gave me one more day," created the most silent moment in Family Feud history. Steve Harvey stood frozen at the podium, his microphone hanging loosely in his hand. For 40 years, this man had made millions laugh. He'd seen it all. Every answer, every awkward moment, every family drama played out on national television. But this time, something was different. The studio lights seemed brighter. The audience, usually erupting with laughter or applause, sat in complete, reverent silence. And Steve, the man who always had the perfect comeback, the quick joke, the smooth transition, could only stare at the 75-year-old grandfather standing across from him. The cameras kept rolling, but nobody moved. Production assistants stood still in the wings. The opposing family, who moments ago had been strategizing their next answer, now watched with hands clasped over their hearts. Because what had just happened on that stage transcended game shows, transcended television, transcended entertainment itself. This wasn't about points anymore. This wasn't about winning a car or a vacation package. This was about something far more profound, a man who had looked death in the eye and found a reason to keep fighting. And his reason was standing right there on that stage with him, 3 generations of family, all fighting back tears as their patriarch spoke a truth so raw, so honest, so devastating in its simplicity that it stopped the entire world in its tracks. But how did we get here? How did a simple game show question unravel into one of television's most powerful moments of raw humanity? It had started like any other Friday taping. The Thompson family versus the Martinez family. Standard matchup. Standard questions. Steve walked out with his signature confidence, that smooth stride that had become iconic, greeting both families with his trademark humor. The audience was electric, as always. Phones were collected at the door, per show policy, but the energy in that studio was alive, buzzing with anticipation. The Thompson family stood on stage left, Robert Thompson, the grandfather, flanked by his daughter Sarah, his son Michael, Michael's wife Jennifer, and Sarah's teenage son, David. 5 people spanning 3 generations. On paper, they looked like any other Family Feud family. Matching blue shirts. Nervous smiles. Game faces on. But if you looked closer, really looked, you could see something else. The way Sarah kept glancing at her father, checking on him. The way Robert's hand trembled slightly as he gripped the podium. The way his breathing seemed just a little labored, just a little too intentional. The way his family stood closer to him than families typically did, as if afraid he might fall. Steve had noticed. He always noticed. 40 years in entertainment had given him a radar for pain, for struggle, for the weight people carry beneath their smiles. But protocol was protocol. The show had to go on. The questions had to be asked. The game had to be played. "All right, Thompson family," Steve said, his voice carrying that perfect blend of authority and warmth that had made him America's favorite game show host. "You ready to play?" The family erupted in cheers. Robert raised his hand, waving to the audience with a smile that seemed to take enormous effort. The first few rounds went normally. Standard questions. Standard answers. The kind of back and forth that makes Family Feud the institution it's become. Steve cracked jokes. The families laughed. Points were scored. The board lit up with correct answers. Everything was going according to script. But then came round 4. The question that would change everything. Steve opened the card, glanced at it, and read aloud with his usual theatrical flair. "Name something you thank God for every single day." A simple question. The kind Family Feud asks all the time. Faith-based, feel-good, designed to get heartwarming answers that make audiences smile. Family. Health. Food on the table. A roof overhead. The survey said these would be the top answers. The studio buzzed with anticipation. But nobody, not Steve, not the producers, not the audience, was prepared for what happened next. Robert stepped forward to the podium. His family watched him carefully, protectively. Steve stood ready with his microphone, expecting the usual answer. Expecting my family, or my health, or something equally appropriate for daytime television. But Robert didn't answer immediately. He stood at that podium, 75 years old, shoulders slightly bent from 7 decades of living, and he took a breath. A long, deep breath that seemed to carry the weight of something far heavier than a game show question. The audience quieted. Even the opposing family sensed something shifting in the room's energy. Steve's smile faded slightly, replaced by something more attentive, more present. His comedian's instinct told him to crack a joke, to ease whatever tension was building, but his human instinct told him to wait. To give this man space. To let whatever needed to happen, happen. Robert looked up at Steve with eyes that had seen too much pain, too much loss, too much struggle. And then he spoke. His voice was quiet, trembling, but every word landed with the force of a sledgehammer. God gave me one more day. The words hung in the air like a confession, like a prayer, like a revelation. Steve's expression changed instantly. The smile disappeared entirely. His eyes widened. His body language shifted from entertainer to human being, from host to witness. He took a small step back from the podium, not in retreat but in respect, as if recognizing that something sacred was happening. Say that again, Steve said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. It wasn't a request for clarification. It was an invitation. A space being opened for truth. Robert's voice grew stronger, more certain. Every morning when I wake up, I thank God that He gave me one more day. Because 2 years ago, the doctors told me I had 3 months to live. Stage 4 cancer. They said there was nothing they could do. Send me home to get my affairs in order. The studio became a cathedral of silence. You could hear nothing. Not a cough. Not a shuffle. Not a breath. 200 people holding their collective breath as this man, this stranger, this contestant on a game show, laid bare the most intimate truth of his existence. Steve Harvey, for perhaps the first time in 4 decades on stage, didn't know what to say. So he did something that broke every rule in the game show handbook. He set down his cards. He stepped away from his mark, the spot on the floor where hosts are supposed to stand. He walked directly to Robert, crossing that invisible line between host and contestant, between professional and personal. The cameras followed him, unsure what was happening, capturing a moment that was entirely unscripted, entirely unrehearsed, entirely real. Steve stood before Robert, not as a host, not as a celebrity, but as one human being before another. His eyes were wet. His hand reached out, touching Robert's shoulder with a gentleness that transcended television, that spoke of profound respect, profound recognition of what this man had endured. How long has it been? Steve asked, his voice thick with emotion. 2 years and 4 months, Robert said. Every day is a gift. Every sunrise. Every moment with my family. Every breath. I wake up, and before my feet hit the floor, I say thank you, God, for one more day. Because I wasn't supposed to see my grandson graduate high school. I wasn't supposed to walk my daughter down the aisle when she remarried. I wasn't supposed to be here today, standing on this stage with all of them. His voice broke on the last words, and his family, unable to maintain their composure, closed ranks around him. Sarah wrapped her arms around her father's shoulders. Michael gripped his hand. David, the teenage grandson, wiped tears from his eyes with the back of his hand. The opposing family, the Martinez family who had been competing against them, abandoned their podium entirely. They walked across the stage, breaking every game show rule, and stood with the Thompsons. United not as competitors but as witnesses to something profound, something that reminded everyone in that studio why we're here, what matters, what's real. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Steve turned to the audience, his face streaming with tears. He made no attempt to hide it, no attempt to maintain the professional veneer that television usually demands. He was simply present, simply human, simply broken open by the raw truth of what he'd just heard. Ladies and gentlemen, Steve said, his voice catching, I've been doing this for a long time. I've seen a lot of families. I've heard a lot of answers. But what this man just said, what this man is living, is bigger than any game. This is about life. This is about gratitude. This is about fighting when the world tells you to give up. This is about faith when there's every reason to lose it. Behind the scenes, producers were frantically gesturing, trying to figure out what to do. The show had gone completely off script. The clock was ticking. Commercial breaks were being missed. But Steve Harvey didn't care about any of that. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out something small. A business card. His personal card, the one he rarely gave out, the one reserved for people who truly needed to reach him. He placed it in Robert's hand and closed the man's fingers around it. "You call me," Steve said firmly. "Not for the show. Not for publicity. You call me because I want to know you. I want to hear how you're doing. I want to celebrate every single one of those days that God keeps giving you. Because you just reminded all of us, everyone in this studio, everyone watching at home, what really matters." The audience rose to their feet. Not because they were prompted. Not because an applause sign lit up. They rose because something in the human spirit recognizes truth when it hears it. They rose because this 75-year-old man, fighting for his life every single day, had just given them all a gift: perspective. Gratitude. A reminder that every morning we wake up is a miracle we've stopped noticing. Robert looked at the card in his hand, then up at Steve, tears streaming down his weathered face. "Thank you," he whispered. "Not just for this. For listening. For caring. For making me feel like my story matters." "Your story doesn't just matter," Steve said, his voice strong now, certain. "Your story is everything. Your fight is everything. And the fact that you're standing here right now, with your family, still fighting, still grateful, still thanking God for one more day, that's not just inspiring. That's prophetic. That's a message everyone needs to hear." Steve turned back to the game board. The questions still displayed. "Name something you thank God for every single day." He looked at it for a long moment, then at the production team, then back at Robert. "Survey says," Steve announced, his voice filled with a mix of sorrow and pride, "this answer isn't on the board. Because some truths are too big for surveys. Some answers can't be quantified or predicted or put into neat little boxes. Some things you just have to experience to understand. But this is the moment no one in the studio, and no one watching at home ever saw coming." Steve made a decision. He walked over to the Martinez family, the opposing team, and asked them a question that wasn't in the script, wasn't approved by producers, wasn't part of any plan. "Do you want to keep playing, or do you want to do something different?" The Martinez family didn't hesitate. Their patriarch, Carlos Martinez, stepped forward. "We want to give them our points," he said. "All of them. Because what we just witnessed, what that man just shared, that's worth more than any car, any vacation, any prize. That's worth everything." The audience erupted. Not in polite applause, but in the kind of genuine, thunderous response that only happens when people witness something that transcends entertainment and touches the sacred. Production staff were crying. Camera operators had tears streaming down their faces. Even the usually stoic floor director had to step away to compose himself. Steve looked at both families now standing together on stage, arms around each other, competitors transformed into a community by one man's truth. He shook his head slowly, overcome. "This," he said, gesturing to the scene before him, "this is what it's all about. Not the game. Not the prizes. Not the TV show. This. Connection. Humanity. The courage to be honest about our struggles and the grace to support each other through them." He turned to Robert one more time. "You came here today to play a game. But you gave us something far more valuable. You gave us perspective. You gave us gratitude. You reminded us that every single day we wake up, we should be thanking God, the universe, whatever you believe in, for the gift of one more day. Because it's not guaranteed. It's not promised. It's a gift." The show eventually resumed. They finished the game, though no one particularly cared about the outcome anymore. The Thompson family won, but it felt almost beside the point. What they'd really won, What everyone had gained couldn't be measured in points or prizes. When taping wrapped that day, something unprecedented happened. The entire studio audience remained seated. Nobody rushed for the exits. Nobody checked their phones that had been returned to them. They sat in that space, processing what they'd witnessed, reluctant to leave the sacred ground that had been created by one man's simple truth. God gave me one more day. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. Robert Thompson lived another 18 months after that day. He called Steve 3 times. Not for favors. Just to talk. Just to say thank you for one more day. Steve Harvey keeps that moment with him everywhere he goes. In interviews, he calls it the day he stopped being just a host and remembered what it means to be human. And somewhere, in a small town in Ohio, David Thompson, the grandson, keeps his grandfather's Family Feud contestant badge in a frame on his desk. Beneath it, a single line. God gave me one more day. The most powerful lesson doesn't come from winning. It comes from a 75-year-old man who taught millions that gratitude isn't about what you have. It's about waking up and being thankful you get to try again.